Sarah Bennett had always been the type of person who poured her heart into everything she did. As a passionate elementary school teacher, she loved nurturing young minds and watching her students grow. Yet, there was one dream Sarah had held close to her heart for as long as she could remember, a dream of becoming a mother. For years, Sarah and her husband, Ethan, shared this dream. Married for nearly 5 years, their love story had been one of shared ambitions and unwavering support. Ethan, a civil engineer with a calming presence, was Sarah's rock through thick and thin. Together, they envisioned a life filled with the laughter of children, the pitter-patter of tiny feet, and the chaos of family life. But as time went on, their dream began to feel out of reach. Their journey to parenthood had been anything but easy. For over a year, Sarah and Ethan had tried to conceive naturally, only to face one disappointment after another. Each negative pregnancy test felt like a crushing blow, and Sarah couldn't help but feel her hope slipping away. "Why can't my body do what it's supposed to do?" she would ask Ethan, her voice breaking with emotion. Ethan, who was always optimistic, would reassure her, "We'll figure this out together, Sarah. We always do." Still, the strain of infertility began to take its toll. Sarah found herself avoiding baby showers and steering clear of conversations about parenthood with her friends. The once joyful thought of motherhood had become a source of pain and frustration. Ethan suggested they take a break from the constant cycle of trying and failing. "Let's go somewhere," he said one evening, holding her hand. "We need a reset, a chance to breathe and figure out our next steps." Ethan's suggestion led them to the stunning island of Santorini, Greece. The picturesque destination, with its whitewashed buildings and sapphire blue waters, offered a welcome escape from the pressures of their daily lives. As they strolled hand in hand through the narrow cobblestone streets, Sarah couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope returning. One evening, during a dinner with local friends at a charming seaside taverna, Sarah found herself opening up about their struggles. The couple had befriended an older woman named Yia Maria, a warm and wise local who radiated kindness. As Sarah shared their story, Maria listened intently, her lined face filled with understanding. When Sarah finished speaking, Maria reached across the table and took her hand. "You'll be blessed beyond your imagination," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of certainty. "I don't know how or when, but trust me, child. Blessings have a way of finding those who wait." Though Sarah found Maria's words comforting, a part of her remained skeptical. It was hard to believe in miracles after so much heartbreak. Nevertheless, her time in Santorini rekindled something she hadn't felt in months: hope. As the vacation came to an end, Sarah and Ethan sat on the balcony of their hotel, watching the sun set over the Aegean Sea. They talked late into the night about their future and the steps they were willing to take to make their dream a reality. When they returned home, Sarah made a decision that would change their lives forever. "Let's try artificial insemination," she told Ethan, her voice steady but filled with apprehension. It wasn't an easy choice, but it felt like their next best option. Ethan, ever supportive, agreed. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," he said, wrapping her in a reassuring embrace. With that, the Bennetts embarked on a new chapter of their journey, a chapter filled with uncertainty, courage, and the faint but persistent hope that their dream of becoming parents might finally come true. Despite her initial doubts, Sarah Bennett followed through with the decision to undergo artificial insemination. The procedure was relatively simple and quick, but emotionally, it was one of the most challenging experiences of her life. As she lay on the clinic bed, staring at the sterile white ceiling, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging voice in her mind. What if it doesn't work? What if I can't carry a child? Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. "This is just another step, Sarah," he whispered. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you for trying." His steady reassurance was the anchor she needed in that moment, but even his optimism couldn't quiet her fears. The days that followed were filled with anxious waiting. Sarah tried to keep herself busy with work and hobbies, but every morning she woke up wondering, is it happening? 2 weeks later, the day arrived to take a pregnancy test. Ethan insisted they do it together, so they sat in the bathroom, staring at the small stick that held so much weight in their lives. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, as the test display cleared, Sarah gasped as it was positive. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Ethan, her voice trembling. "It worked. Ethan, it worked." Ethan swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it, Sarah. We're going to be parents." For the first time in years, the weight of disappointment and despair lifted from their shoulders, replaced by a joy they had almost forgotten was possible. But as the initial excitement settled, the reality of the journey ahead began to sink in. Sarah scheduled her first doctor's appointment to confirm the pregnancy. When the day arrived, she sat nervously in the exam room, clutching Ethan's hand. The doctor entered with a warm smile. "Well, Sarah, your blood work shows some very high HCG levels. That's a good sign." "High HCG levels?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing. The doctor nodded. "It often means the pregnancy is progressing well, but it could also indicate multiple pregnancies, twins, or even triplets." Sarah and Ethan exchanged wide-eyed looks. "Twins? Triplets?" Ethan repeated, his voice tinged with equal parts excitement and disbelief. "It's too early to confirm," the doctor said, "but we'll know more at your first ultrasound in a couple of weeks. For now, let's celebrate this wonderful news. You're pregnant." The ride home was filled with excited chatter about the possibility of having more than one baby. "Can you imagine?" Ethan said, grinning. 2 or 3 little ones running around. It'd be chaos, but the good kind." Sarah, still processing the news, leaned back in her seat and smiled. "I just want them to be healthy," she said quietly. But deep down, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe Ia Maria's words in Santorini were coming true. As the weeks passed, Ethan threw himself into preparing their home for the potential arrival of multiple babies. He began researching everything from cribs to car seats, comparing reviews and making lists of what they'd need. "If we're having twins or triplets, we'll need to be ready," he said one evening, holding up a tape measure to determine if their guest room could be converted into a nursery. Sarah couldn't help but laugh at his enthusiasm. "You're already acting like a dad," she teased. "And you're going to be the best mom," Ethan replied, pulling her into a hug. Despite Ethan's optimism, Sarah's emotions fluctuated. There were moments of pure joy, but also moments of overwhelming fear. Could she handle multiple babies? What if something went wrong during the pregnancy? But every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of how far they'd come. Finally, the day of the ultrasound arrived. As Sarah lay on the examination table, Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the machine as the technician moved the wand across Sarah's belly. Then, suddenly, the technician paused. "Well," she said, her voice filled with surprise, "I'm seeing more than just one baby in here." Sarah's heart raced. More than one? The technician nodded, pointing to the screen. I can count at least 2. No, 3. Wait, there might be more. Sarah and Ethan stared at the screen, their jaws dropping. The journey they had embarked on was about to become far more extraordinary than they had ever imagined. Would like to know what they saw next? Keep watching. Sarah Bennett was no stranger to surprises, but nothing could have prepared her for what unfolded during her next doctor's visit. It was a crisp Tuesday morning, and the air felt electric with anticipation. She and Ethan were both excited and nervous as they sat in the ultrasound room, waiting for Dr. Julia Carter to begin the procedure. This should be fairly routine, Dr. Carter said with a reassuring smile as she applied the cool gel to Sarah's growing belly. Ethan stood by Sarah's side, holding her hand tightly. The ultrasound machine whirred to life, and within moments, the first image of Sarah's pregnancy flickered onto the screen. Dr. Carter's expression, however, changed almost immediately. Her cheerful demeanor gave way to something else, confusion, maybe even disbelief. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with worry. Dr. Carter didn't answer right away. She adjusted the probe and stared intently at the screen. "Well, Sarah," she began slowly, "there's definitely more than one baby in here." Ethan grinned. "Twins?" he asked, his tone light and hopeful. Dr. Carter hesitated. "Not quite," she replied. "Let me count to be sure." The room fell silent as the doctor continued to examine the images. She pointed to the screen, counting aloud. "There's 1, 2, 3. She paused, her brow furrowing. 4, 5. Sarah's breath hitched. 5, she whispered. Dr. Carter turned to them with wide eyes. "Yes, 5. But wait." She turned back to the screen, moving the probe slightly. Then her hand froze. "Oh my goodness." "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice now filled with alarm. Dr. Carter leaned back, clearly stunned. "I count 6, Sarah. You're carrying sextuplets." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah and Ethan stared at each other, their minds racing to comprehend what they had just heard. 6? Sarah finally managed to say. "That can't be right. Are you sure?" Dr. Carter nodded, her expression serious. "I've triple-checked. There are 6 fetuses." She paused before adding, "This is extremely rare, Sarah. It's going to be a complicated pregnancy." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his usual calm demeanor shaken. "What does this mean? For Sarah and for the babies?" Dr. Carter's tone grew grave. "Carrying sextuplets comes with significant risks. For you, Sarah, there's an increased chance of high blood pressure, gestational diabetes, and preeclampsia. For the babies, the risks include being born prematurely, low birth weight, and potential developmental issues." Sarah felt the room spinning. The joy of learning she was pregnant had been overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of dread. "So, what are our options?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Carter sighed. "It's a very personal decision, but I need to present all the possibilities. One option is selective reduction, reducing the number of fetuses to improve the chances of a healthy pregnancy and delivery. The other option is to try and carry all 6 to term, but it's a monumental challenge with no guarantees." The words selective reduction hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at Ethan, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know if I can make that kind of decision," she whispered. Ethan crouched down beside her, taking her hands in his. "We don't have to decide right now," he said softly. "Let's take some time to think about it. We'll get through this together." Dr. Carter nodded. That's a good idea. This isn't a decision to rush. In the meantime, we'll monitor you closely to ensure both you and the babies are as healthy as possible." The drive home was quiet, the air in the car heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ethan finally broke the silence. "What are you thinking, Sarah?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I just can't imagine choosing which of them gets to live. But what if trying to keep all 6 means losing them all? How do we even begin to decide something like this?" Ethan reached over and took her hand. "We'll talk to Dr. Carter again. We'll do more research. And no matter what, we'll make the best decision we can for you and the babies. You're not alone in this." Over the next few days, Sarah and Ethan dove into research, reading every article and medical journal they could find about high-order multiple pregnancies. They reached out to support groups online and even spoke with other parents who had faced similar situations. Each story they heard was different, but they all underscored one thing, which is that this journey would be unlike anything they had ever experienced. One evening, as they sat on the couch surrounded by printouts and notebooks, Ethan said, "Remember what that old woman in Santorini told you? That you'd be blessed beyond your imagination?" Sarah managed a small smile. "I didn't think she meant this particular situation," she replied, gesturing to her belly. "But maybe she did," Ethan said. 6 babies, Sarah. It's overwhelming, but it's also miraculous." Sarah nodded, her hand resting on her stomach. "I just want them to be okay," she said quietly. A week later, they returned to Dr. Carter's office for another consultation. By then, Sarah and Ethan had made their decision. "We've thought about it a lot," Sarah said, her voice steady but emotional. "And we've decided to try to carry all 6. We want to give them all a chance." Dr. Carter nodded solemnly. "It won't be easy, but we'll do everything we can to support you. We'll schedule regular checkups and bring in specialists to monitor the baby's development. You'll need to take it easy. No stress, plenty of rest, and a carefully planned diet." Sarah and Ethan left the office feeling a mix of hope and fear. The path ahead was uncertain, but they were determined to face it together. As Sarah rested her hands on her belly that evening, she whispered, "You're all in there, aren't you? We're going to do everything we can to bring you into this world." The weight of the decision hung heavily on Sarah and Ethan's shoulders. After learning the risks and challenges of carrying sextuplets, the couple spent countless nights immersed in emotional discussions. The dining table became their war room, scattered with pamphlets, medical reports, and lists of pros and cons. "Sarah," Ethan said one evening, his voice trembling with emotion, "we have to think about your health too. I don't want to lose you." Sarah reached for his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know it's dangerous, Ethan, but how can I choose to end a life before it even begins? These are our babies, every one of them." Ethan sighed, his love for Sarah evident in his gaze. "I'm scared," he admitted, "but if this is what you want, I'll stand by you every step of the way." To gain perspective, the couple invited their families over for a heart-to-heart conversation. Over cups of tea and heavy silences, Sarah explained the situation. Ethan's mother, a retired nurse, was the first to speak. "Sarah, I've seen complicated pregnancies before," she said gently. "This won't be easy, but I also know you're strong. If anyone can do this, it's you." Sarah's father, however, was more apprehensive. "Are you sure you're ready for this responsibility? 6 babies will turn your lives upside down." "We've thought about that," Ethan replied. "We know it won't be easy, but we can't imagine letting any of them go." After hours of discussion, the family reached a consensus, which was that they would support Sarah and Ethan no matter what. Sarah's mother hugged her tightly and said, "You're making a brave choice, sweetheart. We're here for you." The following week, Sarah and Ethan met with Dr. Carter to share their final decision. "We've decided to keep all 6, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Dr. Carter took a deep breath. "It's a courageous decision," she said, "but just like I said before, it will require extraordinary effort. We'll need to monitor you constantly to minimize risks for you and the babies." Dr. Carter wasted no time assembling a team of specialists, including obstetricians, neonatologists, dietitians, and nurses. Each member of the team was briefed on Sarah's case, and a detailed plan was drawn up to ensure the best possible outcomes. "You're not alone in this, Sarah," Dr. Carter reassured her. "We're going to do everything we can to get you and those babies safely through this pregnancy." So, with the plan in place, Sarah's life changed dramatically. Her days became a strict routine designed to protect her health and nurture the growing babies. First, there was her diet. The dietitian on Dr. Carter's team created a meal plan packed with essential nutrients to support Sarah and the 6 fetuses. "You'll need plenty of protein, calcium, and iron," the dietitian explained. "Every calorie counts, so no skipping meals." Ethan took on the role of chef, meticulously preparing meals that met the dietitian's guidelines. He filled the fridge with fresh vegetables, lean meats, and whole grains. "You're going to get sick of kale," he joked one evening, trying to lighten the mood. Sarah also began a regimen of daily prenatal vitamins and supplements, tailored to meet the unique demands of a high-order pregnancy. "It feels like I'm swallowing a pharmacy," she joked, holding up a handful of pills. Next came bed rest. By her second trimester, Sarah was advised to limit her activity as much as possible. She set up camp on the living room couch, surrounded by pillows, blankets, and stacks of books. "Bed rest might sound relaxing," Sarah said to Ethan one evening, "but it's hard not being able to do the things I love. I miss my students, my garden, and even grocery shopping." Ethan knelt beside her, placing a hand on her belly. "You're doing the most important job right now," he said. "You're giving our babies the best chance they can have." Regular hospital visits became another cornerstone of Sarah's new routine. She underwent weekly ultrasounds and checkups to monitor the baby's development. Each visit brought a mix of anxiety and relief as the doctors measured heartbeats, checked fluid levels, and tracked growth. Dr. Carter also introduced Sarah to the neonatal intensive care unit staff, who would play a vital role in the baby's early lives. "It's better to be prepared," Dr. Carter said. "Premature birth is likely, and the NICU team will be ready for anything." Sarah and Ethan toured the NICU, their emotions swirling as they saw the tiny incubators and monitors. "It's comforting to know they'll be in such good hands," Ethan said, squeezing Sarah's hand. The amazing thing about Sarah and Ethan grew closer to themselves with this rough period. They leaned on each other for strength, their shared determination forging an unbreakable bond. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Ethan placed his ear against Sarah's belly. "Do you think they can hear us?" he asked. Sarah smiled, running her fingers through his hair. "I'd like to think so. Maybe we should start talking to them more." From that night on, they made it a ritual to speak to their babies. They read bedtime stories, sang lullabies, and shared their hopes and dreams for the future. "You're all so loved already," Sarah whispered one night, her hands cradling her belly. "We can't wait to meet you." Despite the challenges, Sarah and Ethan felt a sense of purpose and hope. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but their love for each other and for their unborn children gave them the strength to keep going. The months of Sarah's pregnancy were a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and triumphs. Determined to document every moment of this extraordinary journey, she started a diary, a private space where she could process her physical and emotional changes. As Sarah chronicled her experience, Ethan became more involved than ever before. His role shifted from supportive partner to full-time caretaker. With Sarah on bed rest and unable to manage many household tasks, he took on everything: cooking, cleaning, shopping, and preparing the nursery. Ethan had always been meticulous, but now his attention to detail became even more pronounced. He spent hours painting the nursery walls a soft yellow, adding cute animal decals around the room. He assembled cribs, laid out tiny clothes, and made sure everything was in place for the arrival of their babies. "It's going to be chaos, but I want it to be a warm, welcoming chaos," he said one afternoon after finishing the last crib. Managing finances became a top priority as well. The couple had never expected the financial burden of raising 6 babies, but Ethan approached the situation with practicality. He researched every possible financial assistance program for families with multiple births and started planning a budget that could accommodate their growing needs. "We'll make it work," he assured Sarah, holding her hand during one of their nightly conversations. "It won't be easy, but we'll find a way." Along the pregnancy journey, something happened that surprised the couple. News of Sarah's pregnancy spread throughout their town, thanks to a local reporter who heard about the extraordinary journey the couple was on. The story ran in the local newspaper and was picked up by several social media platforms where it quickly went viral. Sarah and Ethan were overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from their community. One day, while Sarah was resting in bed, she received a package at the door. It was filled with baby clothes, toys, and diapers, donated by well-wishers who had heard their story. Ethan smiled at Sarah as he unpacked the items. "This is amazing. We have so much support. These people really care." Overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers, Sarah started a public social media account to update the community on her progress. As the weeks passed, her followers grew exponentially, with people from all over the world sending messages of encouragement. "You're doing an amazing job," one comment read, "sending you love and positive energy for a safe delivery." One of the most touching moments was when a local school held a fundraising event for Sarah and Ethan. Children in the community created handmade cards for the babies, and parents donated money for the growing family's expenses. The support from the community, both emotional and financial, became a lifeline for Sarah and Ethan. It was a reminder that they were not alone on this journey. At week 28, the stress of carrying 6 babies began to take its toll on Sarah's body. What had once been a joyful journey began to turn into a battle for survival. One evening, Sarah felt an unusual discomfort, sharp pains that sent her into a panic. She immediately called Ethan, who rushed home from work. "I think something's wrong," Sarah whispered, clutching her stomach. Ethan's face paled as he quickly dialed Dr. Carter's emergency number. Within an hour, the couple was in the hospital, where Sarah was hooked up to various machines. Dr. Carter arrived to assess the situation. "We're going to need to monitor you closely, Sarah," she said. "You're showing signs of preterm labor, and I want to be cautious. You're going to need to stay here for round-the-clock monitoring." The days that followed were some of the hardest for Sarah. Being hospitalized meant no more visits to the nursery, no more walks in the park, and, most significantly, no more time with Ethan in their home. Every moment was filled with uncertainty, and Sarah felt a growing sense of isolation. She wrote in her diary, "I feel so helpless. I can't even stand up without feeling dizzy. The machines are everywhere, and I can't get comfortable. I just want to go home. I want to feel like myself again. But I also want my babies to be okay. Please, God, keep them safe." Ethan's support never wavered. He was by her side every day, holding her hand, offering words of encouragement, and making sure she knew she wasn't alone. He arranged for daily updates with the doctors and stayed up late at night, researching ways to keep Sarah comfortable. "We're in this together," he would whisper to her, stroking her hair gently. "You're the strongest woman I know." Despite the emotional toll, Sarah knew that Ethan's unwavering love was her anchor. "His strength makes me stronger," she wrote in her diary one night. "When I feel like I can't go on, he reminds me why I have to. He's my rock." The hospital team was also incredibly supportive, and Sarah found comfort in their expertise. Nurses and doctors checked on her regularly, ensuring that both Sarah and the babies were being monitored closely. "We're doing everything we can to make sure you're okay," Dr. Carter reassured her during one visit. "Hang in there, Sarah. We're almost through the toughest part." Though Sarah's hospitalization was difficult, it also brought some unexpected moments of joy. Ethan organized a video call with the nursery, so Sarah could see the room that had been meticulously prepared for the babies. "It looks perfect," she said, her eyes brightening as she gazed at the cribs. "I can't wait to bring them home to this." On days when Sarah felt discouraged, she would think about the future, the moment when she would hold her babies in her arms. Despite the pain, despite the challenges, she found hope in those dreams. "I can do this," she whispered to herself one evening as she lay in the hospital bed. "I have to. For them." With Ethan's support and the unwavering care of the medical team, Sarah held on to the hope that the toughest part of the journey was behind her. Though the future remained uncertain, she knew one thing for sure, that she was not giving up. One quiet morning, Sarah had been feeling uncomfortable the night before. More contractions, more discomfort, but nothing could have prepared her for the urgency of that day. The doctors had warned her that the babies could come at any moment, but now the moment had arrived. Ethan was by her side, holding her hand tightly as nurses and doctors rushed around her, preparing for the delivery. "It's time," one of the nurses said softly, her voice steady but urgent. Sarah's heart raced as she was quickly wheeled down the sterile, cold hallways of the hospital toward the operating room. She barely had time to process the sheer number of people involved in the procedure. There were dozens of medical professionals, each with their own specific task, and it was clear to Sarah that this was no ordinary birth. A team of over 40 medical professionals, doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists, and neonatal specialists stood at the ready. Sarah, who had been brave throughout the pregnancy, could feel the overwhelming fear settle in her chest. This was the moment of truth. The babies were coming early, at just 36 weeks, and there were so many unknowns. Would they be okay? Would she be okay? "Stay with me, Sarah," Ethan whispered, his eyes filled with concern and love. "We're going to make it through this. You've got this." His words grounded her, even as she felt a swirl of panic. As she was prepped for the C-section, Sarah found herself closing her eyes, trying to find a sense of peace amid the chaos. The sterile smell of the operating room, the hum of machines, and the constant movement of staff all blended together in a surreal haze. She focused on the comforting presence of Ethan beside her, and the knowledge that this was the moment she had been waiting for, though it was happening much sooner than expected. The anesthesiologist worked quickly, making sure Sarah was numb from the waist down, but she could still feel the sensations of pressure as the surgical team began to operate. Dr. Carter, who had been with Sarah throughout her journey, was at the helm of the team. She'd been preparing for this day for months, and now it was finally here. The tension in the room was palpable, but the professionals remained calm, their years of experience guiding them through every step of the process. Dr. Carter looked up at the team, signaling that they were ready. She met Sarah's eyes one final time before turning her attention to the procedure. "You're doing great, Sarah. We're going to bring your babies into the world now." For Sarah, time seemed to stretch and bend. Each minute felt like an hour, but finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she heard the first cry. It was faint at first, but it was unmistakable. A small, high-pitched sound that filled the room with joy. "It's a boy," one of the nurses called out. Aaron, the firstborn, was lifted into the air, his tiny body weighed down by the immense challenge of being born at just 30 weeks. He weighed only 1.8 pounds. A few seconds later, the second cry rang out, a little louder this time, filled with life. "It's a girl," another nurse called, gently laying the baby onto a warming table. Bella followed, a beautiful girl who weighed just 1.6 pounds, but her cry was strong and clear. Sarah couldn't see them yet, but she could hear the sound of their small, determined cries, each one a miracle in its own right. The next few moments were a blur as the team moved quickly. A third cry echoed throughout the room, followed by a fourth, then a fifth. The team continued to work with precise coordination, each member moving in sync to ensure the babies received the care they needed. By the time the last baby was born, Sarah was dizzy from the rush of it all. Her heart pounded in her chest as Dr. Carter turned to her, a wide smile on her face. "6 babies, Sarah. You did it." The final baby, Faith, was born last, a small but mighty girl weighing just 1.5 pounds. Her cry, though faint, was a sign that she, too, was fighting to survive. The team immediately wrapped her in a blanket and placed her gently into the hands of a waiting neonatal specialist. In under 5 minutes, all 6 babies, Aaron, Bella, Chloe, Dylan, Ella, and Faith, had been brought into the world. But as quickly as they arrived, they were taken to the neonatal intensive care unit. The team worked quickly to stabilize them, intubating each baby to provide them with the oxygen they needed to survive. Sarah, still recovering from the C-section, could only watch as the babies were whisked away. Ethan stood by Sarah's side, holding her hand tightly. "They're in good hands, Sarah. They're going to make it," he said, his voice filled with both relief and apprehension. He had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now, as the babies were taken to the NICU, it was hard to let go. The NICU staff was ready and waiting, having already prepared incubators and medical equipment for the tiny babies. Each of the 6 infants would need constant care and monitoring in the coming days, weeks, and potentially months. The team of doctors and nurses worked in shifts, making sure that every baby received individualized care. Though Sarah couldn't see her babies just yet, she knew that this was just the beginning of a long and uncertain journey. The challenges they would face in the NICU were daunting, but she had faith in her baby's will to survive. A few hours later, after Sarah had been moved to a recovery room, Ethan returned with a nurse to give her the first glimpse of her children. His face was filled with both exhaustion and joy. "Sarah," he said softly, "you've never seen anything more beautiful." The nurse wheeled in a small cart, and there, wrapped in blankets and hooked up to machines, lay their babies. Aaron was the first baby they brought to Sarah, his tiny body covered in wires and tubes. He weighed just 1.8 pounds, but his little fingers curled around Sarah's hand as if to say, "I'm here, Mom." Sarah's heart melted as she held him for the first time. One by one, the other babies were brought in. Each baby was so small, each one struggling to breathe on their own, but they all looked like a miracle in Sarah's eyes. The days and weeks that followed would be filled with countless visits to the NICU. Sarah and Ethan would spend hours every day beside their babies, watching them grow stronger, their tiny bodies fighting to stay alive. The nurses and doctors were incredible, offering support and encouragement at every step of the way. But it was the love and devotion that Sarah and Ethan had for their children that would be the driving force behind their survival. Though Sarah was exhausted from the surgery and the emotional roller coaster of the birth, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The babies had made it through the delivery, against all odds, and now they were in the best place possible for their continued care. Sarah looked up at Ethan, tears in her eyes. "We did it. We have 6 beautiful babies." Ethan smiled, his eyes full of tears as well. "We did, and they're going to be okay. We're going to be okay." The long road ahead would be filled with challenges, but Sarah and Ethan knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. For their babies, they would endure whatever came their way. They were parents now, proud, grateful, and ready to fight for their children's lives no matter the cost. The first few days after the birth were a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah and Ethan barely had time to process the magnitude of the situation before they were thrust into a reality they had never imagined. Unfortunately, their 6 precious babies, each no larger than a small doll, were fighting for their lives in the NICU. Every moment was a battle. The babies were incredibly fragile, and each one faced their own set of critical health challenges. Aaron was struggling to maintain his body temperature as his tiny frame couldn't regulate heat. Bella had underdeveloped lungs, which made breathing difficult. Chloe had an issue with her heart rate, fluctuating wildly in the first hours after birth. Dylan struggled with a weak digestive system, making it hard for him to feed. Ella had jaundice, and her bilirubin levels were dangerously high. Finally, Faith was the most fragile, unable to breathe without the help of a ventilator and requiring constant monitoring for brain bleeds. Each of the babies was connected to numerous machines, their tiny bodies surrounded by tubes, monitors, and wires. Sarah and Ethan could barely recognize them beneath all the medical apparatus, but they knew, deep down, that these little fighters were stronger than anyone could ever imagine. "We need to stay positive," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she held Ethan's hand tightly. "They're so small, but they're strong. They're fighting. We have to believe they'll make it." Ethan nodded, his face pale from the exhaustion and anxiety that had built up since the birth. "I know, Sarah. I know. I'm just so scared." The NICU staff were incredible, offering constant reassurance, guidance, and expertise. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly around the clock to ensure that each baby received the care they needed. The walls of the NICU were lined with incubators, each containing one of Sarah's newborns, and the constant beep of machines and monitors filled the sterile air. Sarah and Ethan spent as much time as they could with their babies, but there were still so many uncertainties. Would the babies survive? Would they be able to overcome their health issues? There were no guarantees. Yet, the couple found solace in the small victories. On day 4, Bella showed signs of improvement. After days of struggling to breathe on her own, she was strong enough to be held. Sarah was overwhelmed with emotion as she finally cradled her daughter in her arms. Bella, so tiny and fragile, looked up at her with wide eyes. Sarah could feel her heart racing as she held her baby close, amazed at how much she had already fought to stay alive. "Look at her, Ethan," Sarah whispered, tears falling down her cheeks. "She's so strong. I can't believe it. She's going to make it." Ethan stood by her side, his face wet with tears. I know she is. We're doing this together." In the following days, Sarah and Ethan took turns sitting by each baby's incubator, offering words of encouragement, touching their tiny hands, and silently praying for their survival. The sound of a baby's heartbeat on the monitor became a lifeline, a sign that their little ones were still fighting. One by one, the babies showed small improvements. Chloe's heart rate stabilized, and she was moved to a less intensive incubator. Aaron began gaining weight and was able to breathe more easily. Dylan showed signs of responding to feedings, even though it took several attempts for him to latch onto the bottle. The staff encouraged Sarah to pump breast milk for the babies, though they were still too weak to breastfeed directly. The thought that she could provide for them in this small way filled Sarah with hope. But every step forward was met with moments of uncertainty. Just as they would breathe a sigh of relief, another challenge would arise. Ella's jaundice levels fluctuated, and she had to undergo treatment under a billy light for several more days. Faith, who had been the most fragile, began to show signs of brain bleeds. Her head had to be closely monitored, and the doctors told Sarah and Ethan that it would be touch and go for a while. As days turned into weeks, Sarah and Ethan found themselves battling a constant emotional and physical exhaustion. They could barely sleep, constantly rushing to the NICU to check on their babies, eating meals on the go, and trying to stay strong for each other. At times, the weight of the situation felt too much to bear. There were moments when they would sit together in silence, tears streaming down their faces, both scared for their children's future, but unable to imagine a world without them. Despite the hardships, they found comfort in each other's presence. They leaned on one another when it seemed like hope was slipping away, always reminding each other that they had to believe in their children. Sarah kept a journal throughout the entire experience, documenting each small victory and every setback. She wrote about the touch of her baby's tiny hands, the sound of their breaths, the first time they opened their eyes. These memories became the threads that held her together. One particularly heartwarming moment came when Sarah and Ethan were allowed to hold all 6 babies together for the first time. The NICU staff had set up a special area where the couple could sit in a large, comfortable chair, and they brought each baby to them one by one. It was an emotional moment as Sarah held Aaron, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Then Bella, her eyes blinking in the light, and Chloe, who seemed to curl up as if seeking warmth. They held each baby for a few minutes, whispering words of love and hope. When they finally held Dylan, Ella, and Faith, Sarah couldn't stop the tears. She touched each of their tiny hands, feeling the power of that first connection. "We're going to get through this," Ethan said quietly, holding Faith in his arms. "Look at them. They're amazing." The couple had been through so much, but they still had each other, and they had the love and strength of their children to keep them going. Each touch, each small sign of progress brought them closer to the hope they desperately needed. In the midst of their struggles, their community began to rally around them. News of Sarah and Ethan's miracle babies spread quickly, and soon the couple found themselves overwhelmed by the support of friends, family, and even strangers. Fundraisers were organized, and people donated money, time, and resources to help ease the financial burden of their extended stay in the hospital. The outpouring of love and generosity gave Sarah and Ethan the strength they needed to keep fighting. Though the journey was far from over, they knew that they weren't alone. Their babies were growing stronger each day, and, with each passing moment, the dream they had once thought impossible, becoming parents to 6 healthy children, was slowly starting to come true. After 3 long months in the NICU, Sarah and Ethan stood outside the hospital, gazing at their 5 healthy babies nestled in their car seats. It was hard to believe how far they had come. Just weeks ago, they were unsure whether they would even get to hold their children outside of the sterile hospital walls. Now, 5 of their 6 precious babies were ready to come home. The couple had spent countless hours at the hospital, learning to care for their tiny newborns, and their lives had revolved around pumping milk, feeding schedules, and monitoring every little change in their baby's health. Each milestone had been a victory. First breaths, first feeds, first cuddles. They had lived in a constant state of worry, but also a state of deep love and gratitude for each precious moment with their children. Today was a day they had been dreaming of for months. As they buckled their babies into the car, Sarah couldn't stop smiling, but there was a bittersweet edge to her happiness. Faith, the smallest and most fragile of the sextuplets, was still in the NICU. She had not yet gained the strength to go home with her siblings, her lungs still developing and her weight just below the required threshold. "It's hard, isn't it?" Sarah whispered, glancing at Ethan as they prepared to drive home. "I'm so happy they're coming home, but I just want Faith to be with us. It doesn't feel complete without her." Ethan nodded, his hand resting on hers. "I know, but she's getting stronger every day. We're not giving up on her, Sarah. She'll be home soon." With their 5 babies safely in the car, the couple made their way to their home, where they had prepared a nursery filled with cribs and soft pastel-colored blankets. They had imagined this moment for so long, having their family under one roof, finally able to care for them in the comfort of their own home. But the reality was more challenging than they had anticipated. The quintuplets required constant attention. Feeding times were spread out throughout the day, with bottles to prepare, diapers to change, and endless soothing to do. Sarah and Ethan had divided the responsibilities as best as they could, but exhaustion quickly set in. Between taking care of the babies and visiting Faith in the hospital, they barely had time for themselves. "I can't believe how much we have to juggle now," Sarah said one evening as she and Ethan sat together on the couch, both of them looking exhausted but content. "But I wouldn't change it for the world." Ethan smiled and kissed her forehead. "We're doing it together. We've got this." At first, the house felt overwhelming, noisy, chaotic, and never quiet. The quintuplets had their own little personalities, but they were still so tiny and vulnerable. Aaron and Dylan had become the biggest eaters, demanding attention at every feeding time, while Chloe and Bella were a little more independent, often dozing off in the middle of their bottles. Ella had a calm, serene nature, while Faith, still at the hospital, was the one on Sarah's mind constantly, The couple continued their daily visits to the hospital, driving 30 minutes each way, even with the busy schedule at home. Faith's progress was slow but steady. Every day there was a new sign of hope. She gained a few ounces, her breathing became less labored, and her cries grew stronger. But there were still setbacks, and Sarah couldn't bear to leave her alone for too long. "I can't wait to bring her home," Sarah said during one of her visits, speaking to the nurse who was monitoring Faith. "I feel like the family will finally be whole when she's here." The nurse smiled warmly. "She's a fighter, just like her siblings. She'll be joining them soon enough." 2 months later, the call Sarah had been waiting for came. It was the hospital. Faith had gained enough weight, and her lung development had improved to the point where she was finally ready to go home. The joy that filled Sarah's heart at that moment was indescribable. She couldn't wait to hold her baby in her arms again, and this time it would be at home. Sarah and Ethan drove to the hospital, filled with anticipation. When they arrived, Faith was waiting for them, dressed in a tiny outfit and swaddled in a soft blanket. Her small but sturdy body was a sign of how far she had come. Sarah couldn't believe it. After months of worrying, she was finally coming home. "She's here," Sarah whispered, tears of relief in her eyes. Ethan smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "We made it, Sarah. We've got all 6 of them now. Our family is finally complete." The ride home was quieter than the last time. The quintuplets were sleeping soundly in their car seats, and Faith was nestled in Sarah's arms, her breathing steady and calm. The couple felt an overwhelming sense of peace. When they arrived home, the house seemed different. It felt full now, full of life, full of hope. The nursery was no longer just a room with cribs. It was a place of love and laughter, of family. And although they knew the road ahead would still be challenging, they were finally ready to face it all together. The babies, now together under one roof, started to thrive in their new environment. The medical team continued to offer support, but most of the hard work was now in Sarah and Ethan's hands. They worked tirelessly, making sure their babies were well cared for, while also making time for their own relationship. Through it all, they learned the value of patience, trust, and love. Their faith in each other and in their children had carried them through the hardest moments, and now, as they watched their family grow stronger every day, they knew that all the struggles had been worth it. Faith's arrival marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Together, Sarah, Ethan, and their 6 beautiful children had overcome the impossible. They had fought for each other, for their family, and, in the end, they had won. 5 years had passed since that unforgettable day when Sarah and Ethan's lives were changed forever. The house, once filled with constant sounds of beeping machines and hospital visits, was now a joyful chaos of laughter, footsteps, and the occasional toddler tantrum. Their 6 children, Aaron, Bella, Chloe, Dylan, Ella, and Faith, were growing into their own unique individuals, each one blossoming in their own way. Aaron had become the curious, adventurous one, always asking questions and exploring the world around him with boundless energy. His inquisitive mind seemed to know no limits, and his parents often joked that he would be the next scientist in the family. Bella, on the other hand, had a gentle spirit and a knack for caring for others. She was often the first to comfort her siblings when they were upset, and she loved to help Sarah with household chores, even at her young age. Chloe was a little firecracker, full of spunk and personality. She could always be found leading her siblings in creative games or mischievous adventures. Dylan had inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's sensitivity. He was an introspective child, often lost in thought or in a book, but when it came to helping others, he was always the first to lend a hand. Ella had the heart of an artist. She was always drawing, painting, or creating something with her hands. The world seemed to be a canvas for Ella, and her parents often found her masterpieces scattered throughout the house. And then there was Faith, the baby who had defied the odds. Faith's progress had been slower than her siblings, but it was steady. She continued to face developmental delays, particularly with speech and motor skills. However, her loving family had surrounded her with support, and she had made incredible strides over the years. Sarah and Ethan had never once wavered in their commitment to Faith's well-being. They had all adjusted to her needs, and their love for her had only grown stronger. While Faith's journey was different from her siblings, she was no less cherished. Sarah looked at her children now, their laughter filling the house, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She often found herself reflecting on how far they had come, from the uncertain days in the NICU to this moment of happiness and fulfillment. Life, in all its chaos, had become a beautiful symphony. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Sarah said one evening, sitting next to Ethan as they watched their children play in the yard. "I remember when we didn't even know if we'd make it through those first few weeks. And now, look at them. Look at all of us." Ethan smiled, his hand on her shoulder. "We've come a long way, Sarah. I couldn't have done this without you." Sarah's heart swelled with love. "We couldn't have done it without each other, Ethan, and without all the people who helped us along the way. The doctors, the nurses, our community, they were all part of this journey." Indeed, the journey had been one of teamwork and resilience. While Sarah and Ethan had been the pillars of strength for their family, they had never been alone. Their medical team had been a constant presence, providing the guidance, support, and expertise that had made all the difference. The hospital staff, the specialists, and the therapists, they had all worked tirelessly to help the sextuplets and Faith through their early challenges. The couple had also been deeply touched by the kindness of their community. Neighbors had brought meals, organized fundraisers, and offered support in ways that were beyond what Sarah and Ethan had imagined. It had been a humbling experience, one that had reinforced the importance of community and human connection. Now, with the sextuplets thriving, Sarah and Ethan continued to stay in touch with the medical team that had been instrumental in their children's survival. They made it a point to visit the hospital annually to thank the doctors and nurses who had cared for them so lovingly. Sarah also kept in contact with the families of other multiple birth parents they had met along the way. They formed a tight-knit support network, sharing stories, advice, and encouragement. They understood the unique challenges that came with raising multiples and celebrated each milestone together. One day, Sarah sat down at her computer and opened a new document. She had been meaning to share her story for years, but the time had never felt right. But now, after all the ups and downs, the successes and struggles, she felt compelled to write it down. Her journey wasn't just about the miracles of birth and survival. It was about hope. As she typed, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned along the way. She wrote about the importance of never giving up, even when the road seemed impossible. She wrote about the strength that came from vulnerability and the love that had carried her through the darkest times. "Hope isn't just a feeling," she typed. "It's something you have to hold on to with everything you have. No matter how impossible things seem, no matter how many obstacles stand in your way, there's always a way through. You just have to believe, and you have to trust that love will carry you forward. When she finished, Sarah sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had written her heart out, and now she felt ready to share it with the world. She sent her story to a blog that focused on family and parenting, hoping that it would resonate with others who might be struggling with their own challenges. A few weeks later, Sarah received an email from the blog's editor. The message was short but powerful. It reads, "Your story has inspired us. We would be honored to share it with our readers. Your strength and resilience are exactly what the world needs to hear right now." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. She knew that by sharing her story, she could inspire others to never lose hope, even in the face of impossible odds and uncertainties. It was a message she had lived through, and now it was one she could share with others. As Sarah sat back, reflecting on how far her family had come, she realized that this journey had not only changed her life, it had given her a new purpose. She would continue to fight for her children, continue to spread hope, and continue to inspire others to believe in miracles. "Hope is real," Sarah whispered to herself, a soft smile on her lips. "And it's worth holding on to." With that, Sarah knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever faced hardship, uncertainty, or fear. It belonged to anyone who needed to hear that they too could make it through. Her family, her journey, her miracle. These were all proof of the power of hope. And as Sarah looked at her children, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other, and together they could face anything and emerge victorious just like this did during the difficult and challenging moment. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.